Hey guys, and welcome to Reap the Real. This is another one of our SAR Officer stories series. I hope you're enjoying them so far. I'd like to ask just before we start if you could subscribe to the channel and make any comments below on what you'd like to see appearing on the channel. I've got the thought of doing some more paranormal stuff, even possibly paranormal investigating, or searching out paranormal stories and highlighting those. Please give me any ideas that you have. Share any locations, stories, myths, or possible true sightings, or even just places to find more stories, and I'll be happy to share those. So, back to the story now, guys. I hope you enjoy. One of the topics I get asked about a lot here and in real life involves things like the rake, the Wendigo, and other related legends. I can honestly say that I know a lot about any of them. But based on some light reading I did, I can say that I've heard stories that seem to be loosely related to them. You've heard the old adage that legends like that come true from somewhere, and I'm sure that's true. But as you all know, I do try and take things with a grain of salt. You have to, out here. It's sort of like working in a hospital, I'd imagine. You could spend all day thinking about how many people have died there and how they are probably ghosts or whatever you want to call them, all over the place. But it doesn't do you any good. It just makes it harder to do your job. I think a lot of us feel that way. And that's why we try to go about our work like everything is fine. Once you get paranoid, there's not really any going back. And a lot of cadets quit because of it. My park especially seems to have a high turnover rate because the cadets graduate and get freaked out about everything, and they can't seem to let it go. You have to learn to internalize things and shut off. I talked to KD a bit about her experiences because I wanted to know what she thought about the Wendigo. She didn't really have anything in particular to say about it, aside from she didn't want to think about it that much. But she told me a friend of hers had a similar thing happen. I contacted this person, H, aware of my work here, and they're fine with me posting the story exactly how they wrote it. I grew up in Central Oregon. There is a reservation called Warm Springs, about 2 or so hours from where I lived. I only mention that because a lot of people in my area have friends there, and a lot of land in that area belongs to that tribe. When I was a kid, we used to go camping up there. Not on the res, of course, but in the area. And I met a lot of kids who grew up there. I got to know one kid really well. His name was Nolan. And we ended up hanging out a lot. When our families were in the area, our folks got to know each other. So we'd all get in touch and camp out. Around the same time, we'd camp out for about 2 weeks. So we were out there for a long time. I asked him if he camped in an RV. Yeah, my dad had one. So I guess it wasn't really camping, but we'd take our tents and stuff and set them up out away from camp most nights. I didn't like sleeping there because I like being outside. We talked a little bit about camping. So anyway, one year, Nolan and I were out there. I think we must have been like 12 or so. We wanted to go out and camp near the river because we wanted to try night fishing. I think we might have been about a third of a mile from the main camp, far enough away that we couldn't hear or see anyone else. I remember that. We were messing about most of the day. I don't really remember much about it, but we ended up building a fire at some point. And I was really impressed because he had this flint or something that he used to start it. I'd never seen anyone do that before. I thought it was pretty cool. They were going to teach me how to do it, and we really lit some stuff on fire, which looking back was really stupid because it was in the middle of the fucking summer. And if I remember right, the fire warning was either yellow or orange, but thankfully we didn't start anything major. And when it got darker, we sat around, talked about whatever it is a 12-year-old talks about. I don't really remember. What I do remember is at some point he looked over my shoulder at the river and asked me if I could see something. The way our camp was set up, we were about 10 feet from the river, and we were at the widest point. So it was probably about 12 feet out to the other bank. It gets hot up here in the summer, but the water's still cold, which is important. I look over my shoulder and I could see something wading in the river on the other side. From where we were, it looked like a deer, but we couldn't really tell because of the fire. I got up to look closer and I saw a pair of antlers, so I figured it was a buck. But I thought it was weird that it was wading in the water, and it was definitely heading for us. I asked Nolan what he thought we should do. He looked at the fire with this weird expression and tells me to sit down and shut up. So I do, because I'd never seen him act like that. He's whispering at me to ignore it and to just keep talking like we were, but I couldn't think of anything to say. He was saying something about an episode of some show, but I could hear the deer coming through the water, so I wasn't really paying any attention, and I kept trying to see over his shoulder, but every time I did, he'd sort of hit me on the arm and made me look at him. I wasn't really scared. I remember I was just sort of confused, but then I hear the deer come out of the water, and I could kind of make out what it looked like, and I realised it wasn't a deer, because whatever it was walking on two legs. I started to get up. I was super freaked out, but Nolan just shouted me back down and talked louder about his television show. And I could tell he was just as scared as I was, probably even more. He leaned in and poked the fire with a stick and whispered that whatever I do, I can't speak to it. I could see it come closer, and it stood right behind Nolan's back. I was about ready to pee my pants and think I'd probably run if I'd have been alone, but I didn't want to leave Nolan, so I kept sitting really still and sneaking glances at it. It wasn't that tall, but the way it carried itself was just wrong. It's like its centre of balance was screwed up. I can't really describe it, but it was kind of like it kept shifting too far forwards. It stood up there behind Nolan for a long time, and eventually Nolan ran out of things to say, and we just kind of sat there for a second. The fire was making noise, but I thought I could hear this thing talking in a really low voice. I couldn't hear what he was saying, and I leaned forward a tiny bit, and I actually did pee my pants. When I leaned forward too, I couldn't see its face, but I saw its eyes, They were cloudy and milky. And if you want to know what they look like, find the scene from Lord of the Rings where Frodo falls into the lake of the dead. People are floating towards him. That's what his eyes look like. So I saw were these two white eyes floating above Nolan's head, and the really vague shape of his antlers coming out the top of his head. I don't know what my face looked like, but at exactly the same time, Nolan and I fucking booked it out of there. And we ran non-stop until we got back to the main camp. My pants were soaked with pee, so I took them off as we were running and threw them in the bushes. We both stopped once we were in front of my dad's RV, and we couldn't see this thing chasing us. We stood there and caught our breath. I asked him what that thing was, but he said he didn't know. He said his grandpa had only warned him about that if anything ever came up to him when he was out in the desert, he was never ever supposed to talk to it or listen to anything he had to say. I wanted to know if he heard it talking too, and he said that the only thing he'd been able to understand was help you. I think we ended up sleeping in the RV with my parents, and the next night we went back and didn't see anything. That does remind me, in a lot of ways, of the Wendigo legend. There's a phrase used to describe it that I think fits perfect, which is that the Wendigo is the spirit of lonely places. I know sometimes when I'm out in the wilds, where I know there's no one around me for miles and miles, I get this weird kind of craving that I can't really explain. I don't know what is happening to anyone else, but it's this desire to consume. It's not like I crave anything in particular, but more of this weird, distracting hunger that comes from every part of my gut. I also wanted to find out more about the faceless man if I was able, and found a few similar things. I asked around a circle of friends, and one of them said when he was out doing repairs at the park in his area, he saw something kind of like that. We were having dinner in town, 5 of us, including myself. This guy, he was repainting an information booth, and had heard a man ask for directions to the nearest campsite. He didn't turn around because he was up a ladder, but he informed the man that there weren't any campsites nearby, but that if he headed up down the road about 4 miles, he'd find one at another park. He'd asked if he could be of any help, but the man says no and thanked him. My friend says he kept painting, but he was listening and never heard the man leave. The second came up and talked to me. The hairs on my neck stood up, but I wasn't sure why. I just had this really uneasy feeling about the whole thing, and I wanted to finish painting and get out of there. I figured maybe part of it was that I couldn't turn around and look at him, but something just felt off. There was also this weird smell floating around, even before the guy talked to me, kind of like old period blood. I had looked around to see what was causing it, but didn't find anything. So I waited for the guy to walk away, but I didn't hear him leave, which made me think he was just standing there and watching me. So I asked again if I could do anything for him, and he didn't answer. I knew he was there though, because I hadn't heard him leave. So I did this awkward turn on the ladder to look down and just see what he was doing. Now I admit it could have just been my brain fucking up, but I swear you, Russ, for a split second, when I turned round, that fucker didn't have a face. Like he had no face. It was almost concave and totally smooth. And I just about had a fucking heart attack because I couldn't even wrap my brain around what I was seeing. I think I started to say something, but there was kind of a pop inside my head, and suddenly he was just a normal looking guy. I must have looked weird because he asked me if I was okay. And I was just like, yeah, I'm fine. He asks about the campsite again. I point where he has to go. And he's like, I'm not from around here. Can you help me get there? Now this is when I know something is really up. Because there's no way this guy got out here and didn't know where he was. And for that matter, no car around. So, how did he get there? In the first place? I says I was sorry, but I couldn't take him anywhere in a company vehicle. And he's like, please? I don't really know where I am. Can you come with me and help me get there? So now I'm seriously weirded out. I start wondering if this is some kind of ambush or whatever. I told him I could call a taxi to come out and take him where he wants to go. And I pull out my phone and he just goes no and walks away really quick. But he doesn't walk out of the park. He walks back into the fucking trees. And I got right in the fucking truck and started it to get out of there. Fuck the paint or whatever. I looked in the mirror to see where he was as I was leaving, and he was standing right at the tree line again. I don't know how we got there so fast, but this time I know that fucker didn't have a face. He was just watching me leave. And right before I turned the corner, he took a big step back into the trees and kind of dissolved. I guess maybe it was just dark and he blended in, but it felt more like he just melted away. Interestingly, right after this guy finished his story, someone else piped up with another one, but with a slightly different twist. You know, actually, I had something sort of weird like that happen a while back. I was out doing some trail scouting, and I was out in the middle of nowhere, figuring out where we were going. Have this trail run, though I hadn't seen anyone else for probably a good 2 hours, so I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going. I just sort of looked to the ground for most of the part. Then, out of nowhere, I crested this little hill and almost ran into this guy. He was older, probably in his 60s, and I started to apologise to him for running into him. And then I noticed his face, and I probably looked like a complete douchebag because I'd stopped and just stared at him. It took me a second to figure out what was going on, but this guy's face was huge. I know that sounds weird, but that's the only way I can describe it. His head wasn't big enough for anything. It was normal, but the amount of space his face took up was just way too much, like if you took somebody's face and enlarged it by about 2 times. He doesn't say anything. He just kind of looks at me and backed up and was kind of stuttering to say I was sorry. And I went around him and fucking got out of there and did what I needed to do. The whole time I kept looking behind me. because I was so freaked out about what I seen and that it'd pop up behind me or something. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I swear to you, it was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. I switched the topic to the stairs a little later, and there was a defiant shift in enthusiasm. No one spoke up at first. There's a real stigma around discussing them, even when we're away from work. But I broke the ice with a story of my own. And the guy who told me the story about the faceless man told this one, albeit very quietly. A couple of years ago, I was camping with my girlfriend, and we're about 2 miles from the road. This site I know. We went to bed that night, but we couldn't sleep because someone interjected a funny comment, and we were just dangerously close to going off on another subject, but I got us back on track. Yeah, really funny, you fucker. No, it was because we kept hearing this grinding noise. My brother used to grind his teeth in his sleep, and that kind of reminds me of that. My girlfriend's freaked out, but I just kept telling her to ignore it because I've heard it before. And you just have to ignore it. It goes away eventually. You guys know what I mean? We all knew what he meant. So eventually I got her to go to sleep, but I woke up probably 2 hours later because something was just off. I rolled out and she wasn't there. I kind of freaked out because he thought for a second and then he took a very long drink. Anyway, I ran out of the tent, calling her name, but I didn't have to go far. She was standing on the edge of the camp, looking at something in the trees, and I could see she was really pale. The fire was low but bright, enough to see her. Anyway, so I ran up to her to see what was going on, and she was dead asleep, but her eyes were open. She had this real spaced out look, you know? So I put my arm around her and led her back, but she wouldn't move. She just said really quietly something like, "I have to go now, Eddie. I have to go. It's here." I was like, "You're just sleepwalking. Come back to bed." But she wouldn't budge. She just kept standing there and saying that she had to go. And I looked where she was looking, and there was a fucking staircase right about 50 yards away. Grey one, concrete. And she started to walk towards it, but I yanked her back, and that woke her up. She looked at me like I was fucking out of my mind, and she asked what the fuck she was doing out of the tent. I didn't tell her anything. I just told her she was sleepwalking. The grinding was gone, so she just went back to the tent with me and fell asleep again. I don't know. I don't like thinking about it, you know? We all knew. You guys remember that kid? I can't remember what it was. Some kind of brain fuck up. Not Downs, but something like that. Someone else brought up. Well, I got to read this report he gave when they found him a week after he went missing. It was fucked up beyond belief. I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt because who knows what the kid actually thinks is real. But something in this stuff I don't think he could make up. Like what? Well, first of all, he talked about the stairs. He said he'd been watching his dad build a fire and the stairs came up to him and he had to go up them or something bad would happen. The cops couldn't really understand what he was talking about after that because he just kept saying, like the campfire, over and over. Andy kept mentioning sounds, but he couldn't say what sounds. Just that there was loud, and he covered his ears so he couldn't hear them. But the thing I remember most is that they asked him where exactly he'd gone. And he just said he was right there. He kept pointing at himself. And they said they thought that he meant that he thought he never left. He says he wasn't scared because the stairs were there like he said. They talked to him, but not like people talk. Like I said, it was really convoluted and hard to understand. And I have the feeling the cops didn't take most of it down. They ended up just saying the kid had some kind of amnesia or fugue, and that they didn't think foul play was involved. Doesn't really explain why he came back a week later perfectly fine without a speck of dirt on him, well fed, but hey, what the cops say goes. There's still a lot of questions I want to answer. I'll continue to ask around and find out whatever I can. The next update should be soon. Thanks for being so patient. You can also find me on Tumblr at searchandrescuewoods.tumblr.com. Thanks for listening to another episode, guys. If you could please subscribe to the channel, like the video and comment below. Also suggest any stories you may want to share or know of, and I will narrate those. I'll be uploading the next one very shortly, hopefully tomorrow. So keep listening, guys.